Hey everyone, the other day I had the opportunity and honor of speaking with Michael Arbus, who is the CEO of one of Canada's oldest and largest cryptocurrency exchanges, Bitbuy. Michael provides some really interesting behind the scenes commentary about being a CEO for a major cryptocurrency exchange, as well as some really good insight into what the regulatory landscape is looking like for cryptocurrency exchanges here in Canada. So without further ado, here's our conversation. We're here with Michael Arbus from Bitbuy. Let's hear a little bit about yourself and how you got involved with Bitbuy, because you're not the founder, you came in as a CEO. What's kind of your story from that? What's your background and what brought you into Bitbuy?
That is a great question. I've had a pretty diverse background, fortunately. And I like to think about my career in sort of two buckets. The first being my chapter in finance, and I got as deep as I possibly could in it. And the second chapter being in operations. And sparing you some of the details, my initial roots were on trading floors. So I've worked, thankfully, at some of Canada's largest trading floors and also in the United States. And part of my occupation was to research, write, analyze, present ideas, and then actually bring them back and execute them on the floor. So I was responsible for building teams, really deep into the numbers and presentation of themes and stories, working with executives on their financing plans, and I loved everything about it. I was able to sit through two cycles in that capacity. I sat through the tech crash, which was interesting in of itself. And when I think back to those days, I was a younger guy. I didn't really understand finance. I was meeting entrepreneurs, very similar to what you might see in crypto with new tokens coming out. People presenting their dreams and stories and talking a little bit about what numbers they needed based on revenue multiples. And when the tech crash happened, that industry got wiped out. So for me, it became a little bit more about what's on the come. And in Canada, there was trade, there was income trust coming, there was globalization, which led to commodity price, that revaluations happening in our equity markets. And so for me, I became more involved with the trading side. As well, in the mid-2000s, when I started on trading floors, there was this new inception of the hedge fund. So hedge funds always existed, but as a mainstream model, there were very few. And they had very confidential strategies that wasn't very mainstream as you'd see today, where you've got 5 or 6 different approaches that multiple funds do marginally better than one or the other. So my job was to basically throw my cart around town, open up accounts, find people that were growing their assets under management, applying certain strategies, and really help them and advise to say, here's a situation that might meet your fund mandate. And let's see if you want to execute it, come through me at the brokerage that I was working for. Then 08 happened and 09. And for me, I was getting on in years. I'd done my turn. I'd written credit research. I'd written equity research. I traded. I traveled. I was very well traveled at the time. And I decided to hang up my boots and say, not goodbye to finance, because that's where my training and passion was, but to try operations. And so what I kind of learned, just an interesting side note, is just because you know a lot about numbers and finance and the language of finance doesn't necessarily mean that you understand how to operate and make decisions based on financial assessment. So I started off, I ran an earlier stage resource company that happened to be located in Brazil. It was about financing it, progressing new milestones and organizing teams and ensuring that you were a good steward of the capital that you took from external shareholders. And with a little bit of luck and a little bit of work, that one played out reasonably well. And I moved on to actually taking some of the rewards and the knowledge from working with great people in finance to actually buying a large industrial recycling business. So now we're talking 2015. I've worked for about 25 years straight, all throughout different areas of finance. This was a total new experience. I got to put on dirty boots. I had a union. I had great smart people around me, all with different truck drivers, dispatching fleets, waste and recycling. And for me, it was not dissimilar to finance. As a decision comes before you, you apply a numeric framework to it, and you enforce, and you hope that the decision you made leads to reasonable outcome. But along that path of restructuring the industrial recycling business, Bitcoin was starting to come out mainstream, and we were moving. This was a cash management business. We would buy things and sell things, so it was trade of different scale. And one of the mediums in which people were starting to discuss transfer of funds was through digital assets. And mining was the easiest thing for me to understand. So I had a large workforce, and I did things like we built a mining container.
Oh, wow.
100 rigs moving in a farm. Yeah, it was really, that part was, we were looking at some of the, I remember being on vacation and, new S9s were coming out, and you'd sit there on your phone while your family is sitting to the side saying, "Dad, will you come play in the beach?" I'm like, "Hang on, I'm doing something. I'm trying to secure as many miners as I can." So I had a small group of folks, and we got up to 1.5 megawatts in a small facility that I built using some of my teams from the industrial business, built containers, and we tried to get it up to 10 megawatts at a new site that would have been green. And at that point, I was managing multiple altcoins coming in. I was testing every kind of miner that came to market. And then the crypto winter came. So if I synthesize it all, which was a tough time for miners, absolutely, and a tough time for everyone. But I lived it, which was not dissimilar to living a crash of '08 and living, the tech crash of 2000. So for me, it was just something that was, and I had a whole other business I was running. So when I finally sold that industrial recycling business, which was an exit, I was sitting at home. I had a lot of trading knowledge, a lot of finance knowledge, and a lot of operating knowledge in international sort of global field like oil and gas, and also recycling, which was trading globally with people, and a whole bunch of crypto knowledge. And so I was looking to deploy my funds and my time into the picks and shovel of the industry, since I know my strength wasn't that of being a coder to develop a new kind of protocol. And where could I be helpful? Well, take a look at what a platform is today. If you were to break it up and say, what really is a Bitbuy or other crypto trading platforms and marketplaces? It's a broker dealer and it's a marketplace. So it's like a stock exchange to an extent, and it's like a broker dealer, which I have, a lot of experience in working in. So it was a nice fit for me to bring operations experience and thinking and running people and being kind to people, of all sorts of people at all different levels, and my brokerage and exchange knowledge.
So BitBuy has a founder, from my understanding, and he was the CEO before you. What was kind of the shift that led to you becoming the CEO, if I'm correct on the history of that?
So when I came in, it was on the basis that when I officially came in, it was late November of last year, 2020. And it feels like a lifetime ago. And what we had was a business that was growing rapidly, a platform that was built to handle excess capacity, a service team that was starting to get staffed, and with real money coming in, it was all about bringing people on, rolling them into the lane that we actually needed help in. So service was weak. Let's improve our service levels. Our tech stack, we need more engineering talent. We need a product developer because we're going to start introducing new products we need more front end. We need more UEX experience. So it was rapid fire. And I guess I could say I came in more as the person that would think about our capital markets path, our funding, applying one of the first things I did is I improved our financial model just to help stimulate conversation, like strategically, where do we want to be? Where are we going? Because everyone is so busy. And I can tell you, it was in the middle of a pandemic, and we would sit, at home from early morning till dinner time, quickly break for dinner. I've got 2 young kids. I would commit an hour to that time, and then back at it till midnight, Zoom calls, authoring policies, authoring documents. And along that way, we also managed to secure some financing as well, which was helpful. But we were also starting to make a decent amount of margin on some of the activity that we were doing. So it was the combination of bringing in funds, starting to make just a little bit of money, growing our team all through a pandemic, and then regulation coming all at the same time. So I guess the transition period from bringing in someone like myself was more about everyone was full at the boots. No one here, in my opinion, is greedy. And so there was lots of room and openness to say, something that we don't know. Demographically, I'm a decade plus older than some of the other folks, and I have some season in different lanes. And so when we combined it, I hope that they would say the same thing, that it's going quite well. We all get along really well.
So let's just shift gears a little bit to what you guys are actually in the business of, which is Bitcoin and all these other cryptocurrencies. I find it kind of interesting now that we have Coinbase publicly. We can kind of see some statistics around, how many people are retail, how many people are institution, are people trading altcoins more than Bitcoin? And I guess we'll kind of start with this first, is what is your view right now of Bitcoin from kind of a macro level? Is it just to you a store of value? Do you see it becoming a gold standard, backing reserve currencies? How do you kind of see Bitcoin right now and maybe for the next few years kind of taking shape?
Great question. I should preface it by saying this is my opinion as an individual.
Yeah, for sure.
We at Bitbuy are in the business of listing tokens and offering a service to our users. So this is just my personal take on it. As I've gotten a little bit older, if you go back to my roots, it was about deep fundamental valuation of an equity or an opportunity, and over concentrating when I've done my work and I understand something, really investing in it. And I can tell you lots of good stories, but if you take a typical hedge fund office in New York City, or anywhere in the world, or in Toronto, or on the west coast of Canada, and you walk in, you say, I've got a great idea. This is not a fund manager sitting at the top with $1 billion that has to run a diversified portfolio and follow a strategy. These are people that can make an independent decision to deploy their funds, typically on a concentrated basis. So I come from the grounds of those type of folks like to do deep analysis, really dig in so that way they have knowledge and maybe a little bit of an edge, is what they call it, before they deploy funds. As I got older, though, and I'm more of an operator now, you don't have time to do that. And if you said to me, what's my view on where Bitcoin's going? My old answer would have been, I would like to do a deep fundamental analysis of it, figure out what its cash flow profile is, see if I can figure out a discounted cash flow and bring it back. And it just doesn't work as an equity valuation. It's not that. So is it a commodity valuation? So do you do, when analysts will talk about oil markets, they'll have supply demand side, and they'll say there's a net imbalance of demand coming over the next 7-year cycle, and as a result of that, we think there'll be pressure for any supply that exists on the market for it to go higher, and then you try to forecast the pain point under which a buyer can afford to pay. So is it that? It probably falls more to the camp of supply demand analysis, which is really hard to invest in as an all-in strategy. So for Bitcoin, for me, and digital exposure in general, it was all about what's my net worth, what do I think I should apply to something that seems to be at some phase earlier stage, which would have a smaller allocation. And as I move forward and it's become a little bit more mature, in my opinion, only, I've allocated a bigger percentage of not only my time, but also my net worth to investing in things like Bitcoin. And specifically, I use it as my route in various other crypto opportunities. So even within that allocation, which I currently sit around 5% net worth. So I would say I move in and out of Bitcoin, and when I see something that seems reasonable in an alt opportunity or a yield opportunity or something creative that's within digital that I can understand enough, then I'll move in and out of Bitcoin, but I'm always there with some form of allocation. I'd suggest to you, for me, my Bitcoin allocation is really about that, is that I have a view that it will be higher than where it is now, and over the long term, I'm going to win. And some of the arguments you've heard, and I'm sure you've discussed in great detail, I've seen are inflation. That's one great hedge for me. It's a 5% weight right now. If I'm wrong, I'll be able to stomach it. If I'm right, I think it'll really offset a lot of the risks of inflation, which I do believe are coming. And if you ever get into a deeper discussion, I can talk to you about my overall fears of capital markets and capitalism, but we can talk about that probably another time for hours.
Yeah, no, it's interesting because I work with I talk to a lot of people who would self-describe as Bitcoin maximalists, so they don't even see it as an allocation. They just see it as that's what they've decided to denominate their wealth in, and that's when you look at it like that, it's kind of interesting because you don't denominate your wealth in how many Amazon shares am I worth. But there are people out there that denominate this is how much Bitcoin I'm worth this year, and this is how much I'm worth next year. Whatever the net worth of all my assets are, how much Bitcoin could I buy? So it's interesting to look at it like that. That's more of thinking of it in terms of a currency, I guess I would say. What about corporations and this move? Obviously, I think it was kind of started in the U.S. from Michael Saylor and MicroStrategy of allocating some portion of the corporate treasury into an asset like this. First of all, before I heard about anybody taking corporate treasury and investing it into, Bitcoin, I didn't even realize that corporations would buy things outside bonds, but apparently some corporations have their own equity portfolios and stuff outside the private companies they own. They'll have some Apple stock or Amazon stock, but this idea of allocating some of your excess cash reserves to Bitcoin, are you noticing Canadian companies doing something similar? And if so, could you maybe give us some insight on what types of Canadian companies are doing it? Is it just a wide array? Is it more energy companies? Who's using that strategy kind of in Canada from maybe what you've seen?
Yeah, I'd say from our visibility standpoint, we're predominantly a retail platform, as were most of our competitors. We were catered to those. And remember, as you probably discussed before, Bitcoin or digital assets as a class were retail driven first, followed
Yeah.
on by institutions as became more mainstream. So what we've seen on our end is we started an OTC desk. So that's just our version of white glove service for larger size orders, just to see what was out there. So people that are traditionally used to receiving a phone call, we don't want to force them to an app if they're uncomfortable. We offer that type of service. And for the larger the order, the more attention you might be able to get, or you might more handholding you might require. So we're happy to offer that service, and it's gone reasonably well. It grew between January to present to being a nice percentage of our revenue, and it continues to grow. I'll step back and I'll say, from a regulatory standpoint, this is an issue that some platforms will face because the framework is currently, the ethos of a regulator is to protect the retail public and the investment public losses and crime and fraudulent activity. And there's 70 participants apparently that have self-identified that are involved in this business in Canada, and if not more. And the first thing to tackle is protecting the retail audience. This is just my opinion again. Corporations, I think, will come next, and we're generally perceived to be more sophisticated. So on that front, what I'd say is there could be a bit of a slowdown in the ability of corporations within a regulated framework to even find a platform that will be able to handle their business. And we made a choice at Bitbuy to answer the question finally, that we were going to focus on all sorts of wealth levels, whether it be an individual retail user with $50 that wants to try trading Bitcoin, whether it be a corporation with multiple millions of dollars of excess capital that they felt it appropriate to hold some of the larger coins. We've tailored our approach with the Canadian regulatory bodies to at least have us work together to having that considered. And so what we've seen on our end is a growth in that area. It does not outpace our retail new inflows of funds, but it is one of the focuses for us going forward. And I think it requires also a different level of product, a different level of coverage, and a different level of transparency, which does not exist in most Canadian platforms, or at least global platforms as well. Finding fees. If you're a treasury manager and you're reporting daily what your net positions are, and you need to identify your value at risk at any given time of your portfolio, and you need to compare that against your budget, but your finance department tells you is required to make sure you've got funds available to handle it. Those type of conversations require more than just speaking to a bot or a customer service representative.
Yeah, I think that's definitely like something that I've noticed through a lot of exchanges is a lot of people complaining about customer support because they are getting automated answers or bots or just being told just look at the FAQ before you talk to us sort of thing. So I think that's great that you guys are pursuing, getting as many people as possible on that end. I'll stray off topic a little bit on this because I'm curious if you notice volumes the same way that other exchanges notice volumes. Like when the price crashes in May, are you seeing the same type of activity on your platform as other platforms, people kind of racing to the exit? And then through this last, we're talking about price here a little bit, but like through the last kind of few months, are you noticing activities of kind of accumulation? What can you maybe say about are the activities of your, let's just say retail buyers similar to what has been observed on things like Coinbase as well?
That's a great question. And so the answer is yes. The way that, what you can control as a business operator or as a company is, your relative ranking to your peers, what you're doing right.
Yeah.
What you can't control is necessarily that top line, what's happening in the global universe. And if you said to me, what is from an investment standpoint, why an exchange versus outright of the coin? And the answer is, well, an exchange in theory, when coins go up and down, there's volatility, and when there's volatility, people trade more, and when there's more trading, an exchange like the Toronto Stock Exchange or NYSE or Nasdaq or a Bitbuy actually books more fees. But that relation. So in May, for example, we had a record month. We traded 650 million plus Canadian dollars that month. It was a record for us, and it was a good time. It tested our platform to the limit, and it stood up error free. And if you looked at what happened after that month, after price had come down, in that period of the downtrend, people traded a lot. once it was down and volatility dried up, we saw a similar slowdown. And what I'd say is in August, we've seen a really nice uptick as prices ticked higher. There's also been a lot of volatility along the way. We've been fortunate that things have picked up. We run, we run to spend. So what we make, we spend on growth, because we think that there's this race that's happening right now to develop, the leading platform or brand for Canada, regulated, that can service multiple universes of users. And so for us, it's not about cashing out, it's about spending to make things better. So for example, right before our call today, I went out with one of our VPs, and we were talking about our Zendesk performance stats and how we can have regular data telling us what are the inquiries that we're receiving and how can we address them. What do we do about calls that come in between midnight to 7 a.m. when we might be light on our service offering? How do we handle these things? And it's just, like you said, service matters. Every user matters to us.
What is some of the feedback you've gotten from users? Because what I find generally is most of the people that I know in Canada in cryptocurrency don't have one exchange account. They'll have at least two. They'll be on ShakePay and Coinbase, or BitBuy and FTX. What are you finding in terms of what do users what are they asking for out of Canadian platforms? Because I think, for me personally, I think traders understand that a Canadian platform is not going to have the deep liquidity of maybe a more international thing like Binance. You're not going to have features like derivative products, maybe yet, maybe ever. What are things that your users are kind of asking for lately, and you're hoping to kind of implement sometime in the next year?
Yeah, great question. So there's a few great questions in there. Mm-hmm. So one is about, let's first talk about, most Canadian platforms are brokering through to a US exchange. So while you might place an order with company X, it's a broker, that order is immediately getting routed to another exchange and a spread is being applied to it. And you're getting a fill as a user. And if it's your first time trading and you haven't done thousands of trades and you don't know where to look, you might just say, great, I bought it and I didn't realize, and you might have been told that you're not paying any fees for it. Yeah. It's a similar debate to what you see between Robinhood and Interactive Brokers, the sort of press debate that's happening there right now. So with us at Bitbuy and very few other Canadian platforms, we actually have a marketplace. And so when you place a trade on Bitbuy, Bitbuy is your brokerage, but your order is getting routed to a marketplace that has multiple participants. And it's not just, it is all Bitbuy participants as it stands today. But as part of that participants, we also have open API connectivity to people that want to arbitrage to other markets. So what we like to say is our price is always correctly arbitraged to other markets. So if our price is out of whack where you can trade it in Australia, someone smarter than us has figured out how to do an FX trade on whatever our bid is, and they're offering it out, or they're actually the best bid because they know they can sell it in Australia after doing their FX trade. And inherently, by having an open API network, we're able to at least say on a best efforts basis that the price you get on Bitbuy is a fair market price as best we can. And the more our marketplace grows with more participants, the more valid our price becomes on global scale. So, the question about how deep is a book, let's say a large institution, or even back to our pension fund discussion, decided they wanted to place an extremely large order on the Bitbuy marketplace. And let's even think forward. There is a chance, maybe or maybe not, that when a Canadian institution first chooses to spend Canadian retail shareholders' money as a fund manager, they may be mandated to buy it through a Canadian marketplace. It might be the case that, like we've seen, some exchanges didn't meet the Canadian regulatory scrutiny, that were global exchanges operating here and have chosen voluntarily or were asked to no longer offer services to Canadians. So instead of us going out and taking their liquidity and porting it into Canada, some of these larger trading houses are looking to figure out ways of setting up in Canada, not to establish a regulated marketplace or to establish a brokerage, but to provide that liquidity to the exchanges that exist here. So if you think BitBuy 2.0, not that long from today in a regulated world, if it's palatable to the regulators and it's safe for our users and the public, if we're able to have a very large liquidity provider that can take down hundreds of millions of dollars of flow on our marketplace, then we can really be the place where all institutions choose to come. And if you were to rewind to where we are today, it's not something that I would feel comfortable saying we should do, because we got a policy statement or a framework provided to us in late March, and we've done everything we can, heads down, to meet meet the regulatory obligation, or the requirements, as best we can. And it's iterative. It's continuous improvement. We implement. We've written over. I've heard another crypto platform party say this too. We've written over 300 pages of policies, and it wasn't just about writing them. You're actually summarizing what you do. And if what you're doing is not palatable, you have to change what you do, and you have to push that down through an organization of 65 people. And it requires verification that you're doing what you said. So a lot of the work, when I say it's iterative, is we write a policy. If we're already doing it, we make sure we're doing it to the T, to the letter. And if it's something that we weren't doing, we ensure that we introduce it into our workflow. And that takes a lot of time. And our culture shift too, from a group of guys that built a startup to being a machine that can handle 650 million of volume in one given month, to we're regulated and we have to look more and more like a marketplace and a brokerage every day.
So maybe you can give me a little bit of a snapshot of the regulatory environment then in Canada. I believe you have, like you're saying, you have regulatory policies, you have people on the board that are involved with either the OSC, the IIROC. For maybe some people who are just casual traders here in Canada and are curious what it's like, because we've been hearing nonstop headlines in the US about all the regulation. What is the snapshot of like what the regulatory picture is for crypto assets and brokers in Canada? What does that look like? Is there anything that users should be worried about? Is it, what is the kind of the framework, I guess, in your picture right now?
That is it's an area of focus for us at the high executive level, right down to the person picking up the phone. So it's impacted us in a great way, I would say. From a retail user standpoint, who was a true Bitcoin enthusiast, where you had anonymity, you had various degrees of tax reporting. You could open up a wallet, on a KuCoin account and fund it and do a trade in an altcoin, put it into Bitcoin and get rid of it and never touch that KuCoin account again, and bring it back to a Canadian bank. And that era is something that is in the process of passing. So I didn't create that era of passing. It was regulation globally and observation and institutionalization of the entire asset class, which was great for value. But the offset of that is it came with regulation. And for us in Canada, what I like to say is, we act internally, that the regulators are our friends, and what they've written down is in line with a framework that's not dissimilar to the brokerage industry today. So, but if you can imagine, take a typical crypto platform, any country of the world, not just Canada. 5 or 6 guys got together, and they started buying and selling Bitcoin. They figured it out. They hired a couple of tech guys. They made it a lot easier for people. They didn't worry about custody. Now things they had to start worrying about custody. They found some API connectivity. They added a custodian. They started marketing on Google. Their user base grew. And now all of a sudden, a wall hits them saying, whoa, what you're doing is great, but it's all going to become regulated. First thing we want you to do is identify that you're in the business. The second thing we want you to do is ensure that you can follow a framework that we provide you. And what I fear is that the cost of doing that right for some of the smaller providers that exist in Canada and globally will be too much to bear, especially if you're trying to make a living and you've got 5 or 10 guys and you're taking orders on Bitcoin and that's your business. You now have to be regulated. It's a high burden of time. We've had to make, for example, in our finance and treasury department, over the last 2 weeks, we've hired 2 new, business professionals, some with coding and database experience, to really help our treasury module oversee the stewardship of all of our funds between various banks, custodians, liquidity providers. That's a big. It's not a challenge. It's what you have to do to properly regulate your capital. And so we're spending on. Thankfully, we closed the financing and we had a good run of time, but it's all going right back into regulatory affairs, policy management, new modules, tech development, and what you'll see soon in the way that users are onboarded for any platform. At least within the choices we've made in our dealings with the regulator, there's a lot more questions that come at you when you open the account. You can't just open it and send your funds in anymore. And, we internally think about it a lot and say, well, are we going to offend the bread and butter that got us to where we are, the people that opened up accounts and traded with anonymity to some extent? Well, it's not really our choice to make. It's a global world choice that's been made in most G7 countries and jurisdictions, and we're following suit. And I think Canada showed a lot of leadership in the way in which it's chosen to address it. They've been very open with their time as a regulatory group. We were even meeting with our regulatory bodies, even in advance of it, just to ensure that we were doing things right.
I think about this too sometimes because, when it comes to personally just doing taxes for trading stocks, I have to rely on my platform to give me like a T5008 to kind of figure out everything. Are there any requests or kind of like inquiries coming from the CRA to produce something like that for cryptocurrency trading, like a worksheet, or maybe just give me your advice is like, how in the future do you think people are going to calculate their taxes for trading cryptocurrencies? Like, are they going to get some type of form from these regulated exchanges that gives them all the transactions, or what do you think?
Yeah, it's a great one. So I had a very when I was trading a lot more, and in fact, when I was mining, I had to have multiple accounts because some altcoins only trade on certain platforms. And if you're mining for them because the returns were great, you'd mine for it, send it to that platform, execute it, bring it back if you wanted to into Bitcoin and hold it in your Bitbuy account. So I had a complex web of multiple transactions happening on multiple exchanges. And I also had personal trades going on in digital assets too. And at year end, you sit there doing your taxes and you just say, how do I reconcile all this? What is a transfer?
Nightmare.
Right.
Yeah.
So thankfully there are tools, and Bitbuy has integrated into one. And there's a few services out there where I guess the first point is always about just knowing your cost base and getting a long history. So there are providers out there that will say, provide us with viewing access to your wallet and transaction history. And we've made the necessary steps to, is that a dog? Yeah. We've made the necessary steps to actually integrate with some of those tax reporting tools. And at the end of the day, you're going to get a statement if you have a Bitbuy wallet, if you have a Bitbuy in the future. Let's say you have a high net worth account with us when those exist, that will be plugged in. If you've got multiple brokerages and exchanges in digital, and you get that summary that says, here's your cost base, and I've reconciled it by timestamp. So if you transferred from Bitbuy to another platform, and then you changed it into ETH, only some of it remained in cash, and then you brought it back, it time prioritizes all your transactions from all platforms into one statement.
Oh, and, cool.
For me, when things were busy, I would just take my statements and give it to my accountant and say, figure it out. And as the rules change, what should be considered capital gains? What if you buy a yield product? What if you're on Bitbuy a year from now and we're able to offer you a yield product and you're earning staking yields? Is that considered income, or is it considered a capital gain when you report it? So I think all those things will come with time, but the root of it is getting your timestamp of when you bought and sold and what you made, because that's really what your tax basis should be calculated on.
Tell me a little bit about that. You dropped a little nugget there about yields, because I know that some of the exchanges themselves are getting into this, but they have obviously they have platforms that are non-exchanges that are doing the yield thing. So you guys are kind of thinking of doing that with Bitbuy? Is it specifically with like Ethereum just for staking? Or are you thinking of like a general kind of yield for all the assets?
Yeah, it's something that some platforms outside of Canada offered to users, and it made a lot of sense. See a snapshot of everything you hold, and this could be one pro for holding Bitcoin versus, let's say, an ETF. Buying ETF, you're paying an annual fee. You bought it much easier through your brokerage account, which you understood how to do, and that's great. If I said, well, hey, you're a holder of Bitcoin anyways, why not earn 6 to 7 or at some points 12% on your Bitcoin balances, and you'll still have the notional underlying exposure, and you'll be earning a rate of return that compounds annually. That if you're a long-term holder as a store of value, to me that was quite compelling. And some of those platforms that did yield only, they didn't even bother with trading response. Come onto our platform, buy Bitcoin, you're going to earn this yield. When you want it back, we'll send you a Bitcoin or cash. But like right now, for me to defend that before our committee and then take it to a regulator and say this is considered a safe product for our user base, I think will be challenging. And so we would love to have yield. It is absolutely, I understand the appeal from a user standpoint. I've done it myself to pilot it. I haven't been defaulted on yet, but I can tell you the explanation of the risk to justify the yield will be the focus of how you get those products approved long term. And as a result of that, I think it's a healthier thing for the investment community to understand it.
And it's explaining to them to it that's really difficult too, like this idea of arbitrage as well, and that you're giving them, you know, a chunk of what you're basically doing, because that basically, in order for them to really feel rest assured, they have to understand the CME model as well, or any other derivatives model that you're using to get that rate. Yeah, I know BlockFi obviously in the U.S. has come under fire for that because it's, you know, it's just very difficult to explain to people. We'll wrap it up here really quick, but I always like to end on this question. You know, when I think about crypto exchanges, and it's kind of like what differentiates you from the other players in Canada? Because we kind of talked about, you have like the on off ramps, you know, that maybe not for traders, just for buying or accumulating or whatever, maybe like a shake pay. You have, I would say, the crypto exchanges in Canada where you guys fall into. Maybe it's like Endax, BitBuy, CoinSquare, which kind of offer the brokerage, and they have, you know, their own books, or they use other people's books. And then you have like the international platforms that are kind of not fully under regulation but are running in Canada, like the Binances and the FTXs, but it seems those are getting clamped down on. In your space right now, kind of in that middle, how do you differentiate yourself from those other exchanges like the CoinSquares and things like that? What is the biggest value proposition you can say towards your retail users as to why they should go with you over any of the other ones?
We are remarkably similar on the surface in many ways to what a user would see. You see a website, it looks great, it says insurance, it says custody, it says that we've got the best price or no fees entirely. And you know, from a user's perspective, you can go anywhere and you may not know the difference. I think when you dig under the hood, if you were an experienced trader and you said, what are my net fees in transacting with BitBuy long term? I've chosen to allocate 5% of my wealth. I'm going to throw that into digital. I'm going to choose a provider. Who do I choose? If you come to BitBuy, you do get hit with a fee on your way in the door. And once you're on our platform, you are charged a commission for every trade. And I did this math this morning just to show some people on our team. You know, we don't take brokerage spreads like other people. When you have your money sitting in your account, you place an order in an open book that has open players allowed to use our API to participate. No matter who you are, if you're Canadian, you have funds and you're doing appropriate trading that our surveillance deems appropriate, you can be doing arbitrage all day. And I think when I explained it before, we like to think that our market rate in which our users get net is better than anywhere you can get it in Canada. Oh, it's because of the open participation model. It's having a legitimate marketplace with legitimate participants and having pricing. So when you actually trade, you're getting a good price. Part two, I like to say, we used to harbor a lot on you know, safety and security. And I think a lot of other platforms followed suit in their messaging, but we were the first in Canada to do a proof of reserve report and publish it. We just did another one, and we preserve, as per that report, 98+% of the assets that you hold with us are held in cold storage versus in hot wallets. So we don't leave, yeah, it's a big number. So, you know, and as you know, in cybersecurity, you see stories all the time about protocol hacks or platforms getting hit. You know, it's very hard to access cold storage. If someone were to hit us and they hit our hot wallets, it's a very light number relative to what we keep in cold, and that's because of great treasury stewardship. So it's, again, it's about safety and fair pricing. And what you'll see with BitBuy, if you click to our fees section, is we're just open about it. We just tell you what we charge. You know, no one in this world is making money long term yet. What we're all trying to achieve is building something that can be globally competitive and compliant. And so when you ask me BitBuy, safety, security, transparency on our market pricing, transparency on our fees. And also, too, a big part of that is taking care of all users, no matter how big and how small. And I think if you compared some of our service levels to what you've seen on some other platforms, we prioritize it, we spend on it, and we don't care how big or small you are. We want you to be happy with it.
Well, thanks so much for speaking with me, Michael. And yeah, looking forward to hearing more from BitBuy, what you guys are going to come out with in the future. And yeah, hopefully for people who are curious about exchanges and maybe haven't picked all the ones they want to sign up for yet, or are looking for one in particular, I think Michael has outlined the value prospects of BitBuy really well here. And if you have any other questions, just leave them in the comment section down below in this video. And yeah, thanks so much for tuning in.